Hi, welcome. We are so pleased to welcome to the show Dr. Brett Dellar. How are you today, Brett?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's a pleasure. We're so pleased to have you with us. Right, Brett, you lived with crippling depression for many, many years. You put on a facade to the outside world, which you called a man mask. Now, you have worked in many professions. You've been in the police force, you've been a functioning chiropractor, and now here you are mentoring and helping men to help with them with their mental health, which is fantastic. But can you tell us a little bit about when you yourself lived with depression?
Yes, my depression probably hit me probably when I was about 20, 22 years old, 20, 21, 22 years old. And it basically lasted for 30 years. And I put on, like you said, I put on my man mask, and my man mask was me pretending to the rest of the world that I was okay, whereas in fact I was actually behind closed doors. I was in struggle town, and a lot of my best mates, a lot of my great, very close friends never knew that I suffered with it. And definitely, especially being a chiropractor the last 13 or so years, definitely didn't share any of that knowledge with my patients at all. So.
And that is a basic survival instinct in many ways, isn't it? We all have that facade. We all show the side of us we want people to see so that we survive, so that we don't break down. But looking back on it, is it something that you regret hiding, you wish you'd exposed?
I don't regret it because it allowed me to survive. And we all wear different masks at different times, different reasons. I mean, as a police officer, you had to wear a tough mask when it was required. You couldn't go in being vulnerable into certain situations because you wouldn't survive literally at times. So you had to put on different masks at different times. For me, it wasn't about regretting that I wore that man mask. It was, I probably have more regret I didn't do something about it earlier. I thought I was tough and strong like a lot of men are, and we pretend that we are, and in fact we're not. So it was more about me. I wish I'd stepped up earlier rather than just waiting till I was 50 years old, basically.
I don't know about you, Brett, but I also had crippling depression on and off for 20 years. And I eventually had a nervous breakdown age 35, which made me address everything. It all came to a crescendo. However, I don't really think I had the tools or the knowledge on how to get better. And I think that's what stopped me from getting better. I just didn't know where to start. Whereas we're having much more open conversations nowadays about mental health. There's not as much stigma. Famous people are coming out. Do you think that's all really helpful?
I think that's a massive change. 30 years ago when I was struggling with it, especially being in the police force, if you showed a weakness, you were not ridiculed, but you were looked down upon by other people within that organisation at times, because I saw it happen to other men. So I made sure that I kept my trap shut and dealt with it in my own way. And it's not just the tools; it's the other options that are available now. I went to counsellors and psychologists over the years to try and help me, and they helped me to a certain point, but I always go back down that same pattern again. So. I learned different tools over a period of time which helped me, but there were still times where I'd sink into a deep low and I couldn't get out of it no matter what I did, because sport and being active was the thing that really helped me the most. And then when I was about probably 47, 48, I had a couple of knee operations and I just can't run anymore. And running was my meditation. That was my escape, and I couldn't do that anymore. And that's, I think, when things started to unravel on a bigger scale for me in regards to not being able to cope as well as I had been for all those other years.
And sport is such an important part of our mental health, isn't it? It's exercise. It's been proven that, we are much more healthy mind, body and spirit if we exercise as well. But exercise for you clearly was your tool that you went to be okay. And many listeners will be aware that they, like you, are aware they've got depression. They don't know where to turn to help. They haven't yet gone down that self-help route or counselling route, but they do have those props that they go to get them through, maybe alcohol, drugs, sex addictions, shopping addiction, whatever it is. So awareness is the first thing. It's really critical, first of all, to be aware, isn't it? If you're not aware, then how do you address an issue? How can you face it? How can you come to terms with it? Being aware must be that first step.
it is absolutely the first step. You have to have an honest conversation with yourself. You have to sit down and go, right. For me, it was like, okay, when I was in the police force, I had a really bad bout. I was a detective at the time, and I used to sneak out once a week to the counsellor, psychologist that was actually in the organisation. Obviously didn't tell anyone, just snuck out of the office, and I'm going out to do an interview or make up some story, and do that once a week. And that was the first time I had to really face it, and know that I'm really struggling here. I need some help. And having that honest conversation with yourself, it doesn't happen once. It happens every day basically. And what I was trying to do was trying to bury it, and then build up again, and I try and deal with it, then bury it again. And you just can't keep burying it, because what happens is, and I say this quite a bit to different people, we don't just have one of our lives that connect us. And then it's coming out, and it'll seep out in the form of depression or anxiety, or you try and numb it with the alcohol, the drugs, the sex, the porn, all that sort of stuff as well. So it's having that honest conversation with yourself, and actually making sure that you actually step up and deal with it.
And also remembering that healing and getting well is not a quick fix. When we go to counselling, we go and seek these things, and occasionally we can start to feel that little bit better, so our spirits lift a little bit. And it's when this happens, a lot of people fall off and stop getting therapy, or stop getting help, or stop their routines that are really helping them. And it's at them times when we're actually feeling better. It's at them times when we can really practice all of the stuff we've learned, and keep doing it, keep consistent, stay with your therapy, stay exercising if you can, stay with whatever's helping you, because as soon as you stop that, you can easily slip back, can't you?
And that was the big change for me, being consistent every day. And when you first start out, you can't do lots of things to try and keep you on that path. You just have to pick one thing, and one thing every day, just to be consistent. So I read a book called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, and he sort of points out in there, if you do one small thing every day, you won't notice the difference now, but in 31 months time you will, which is about 2.5 years. And I basically went, okay, what can I do to help me mentally to become better? And so I decided just to, I don't do a lot of reading, because with my work, and then my lovely wife and I have a few acres, so I'm out and about working here. So I actually put my headphones on and do my Audible books. And so I decided just to listen to one book every time I was out doing work in the yard, etc., etc. And it was a self-help book. And I've listened to probably 40 or 50 self-help books in the last 3 years. And some of them were really great, some of them not so great. But all of a sudden, bit by bit, it changed my mindset. And from the moment I started doing that, almost 2.5 years later, it took me down a whole different path, because I listened to all these different books. And 2.5 years later, I was basically, my life turned around in 2.5 years in a massive way. So that compound effect was really quite empowering and life-changing for me.
And we live in such an exposed age in terms of there's so much information out there. As you say, if you don't want to read books, you can have the audio books, you can listen to podcasts, you can watch on YouTube. The fact that there's so much information there you can turn to means that there are tools you can grab hold of. You also, though, have set up your own company supporting men. I know you've got a movement called the Momentum Revolution, with men in the middle. And that's a 2.5-day workshop for men, empowering them. Can you tell us a little bit about the course and the exercises that you translated from your journey into the program you've written for men?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back if that's okay, Sue. So I decided that at some stage in my life, I was going to transition away from chiropractic in a small way. I'll still do chiropractic because I love it and I love helping people. But my passion about being with men's mental health stemmed from me getting the help I needed. And I decided to go become a life coach. And I thought I'd just do that a bit on the side. I didn't know where that would take me. I ended up going and doing an amazing course through Real Education in Queensland, and this life coaching course. And they saw through me straight away. They knew that I was BSing about, where I was really at. And you had to coach each other, and I had this amazing friend of mine, amazing friend now, and he basically sat down with me after about a month, and he said, and he was coaching me every week, and I was coaching someone else every week as a part of our training. And he just said, mate, aren't you sick or tired of living like this? Living in pain, living in fear, living in depression all the time? And I went, yep. He said, you think you should do something about it? I went, yep. And then he has this beautiful pregnant pause. It's time. And I thought he rang me over the truck. And I went, you know what? It is. And so he got me to go off and do a 3.5-day workshop that he'd been on. And it changed my life. And since then, I've gone off and done a whole bunch of other workshops. And in that workshop, I got to reclaim my power back. I got to reclaim my issues that I've been carrying around for 44 years. So that was the moment where my life turned around. And then from then, like I said, I've done all these other courses and workshops, and it's just flowed to now where I've got the Momentum Revolution. And the Momentum Revolution is basically designed just for men, so they can deal with their issues, understand where their feelings and emotions come from, why they have a particular behavior pattern. And we create it in a way that they step away from their community and they step out of the comfort zone. And then we try and get them to feel really comfortable, and bit by bit we just get them to start talking. And when you're in that safe environment with a bunch of other men who want to do the same thing, it can be really empowering. And once one starts, all of a sudden the others start as well. And we have an amazing team of men who are there helping me as well. And we share our stories, which gives them permission to share theirs. And now I think that's a big step. Once you give permission to others to share theirs, they can share their story as well. And basically from there, we go through into a whole different sorts of processes over the weekend, which challenges them both emotionally, mentally, physically, and it just gets them to actually deal with their shit in a really positive way in a safe environment. And it's just been, I've been on lots as a participant, but being there and helping men change their lives, it's just the most rewarding job I've ever been involved with. I love my chiropractic work, but this is a whole nother level. And the men are just, you can just see the changes in them, most of them immediately. But that's just the first step. It's a long road from there to still keep on working, like you said, being consistent every day. That's just the first step to deal with your shit and then moving forward.
There's something really powerful, like you say, about community and support groups. And we've heard this from other guests as well. And especially we're getting a lot of messages about male groups, because us women, we do go off to our friends and we do gas bag and we do talk and we generally offload. And even if our friends can't offer anything, we are natural born talkers, whereas men not so much. And I know that's a generalization and I apologize about that, but it's generally true. So I think it does provide a really safe and amazing place for all men to come together. And it's so powerful, and that support thing lifts each other up. And everybody's story can be so different, can't it? But people are feeling the same feelings. Ultimately it's shame, it's guilt, it's sadness, it's hurt, it's not being loved as a young child, or abuse. There's very similar stories that come back, even if they're very different. The feelings are very much the same.
100% agree. Every bloke is going through the same thing, but different stories. And they think they're the only one that's going through it as well. And you're totally right. Men just don't want to talk about this sort of stuff. They don't share it. And so by creating that environment, the brotherhood that they have is just, it's an amazing bond that we all form. And you become friends for life with a lot of these men. And I got a message just yesterday, actually, from a gentleman I did a course with, who I used to play a bit of cricket with. And he did one of these workshops with me, and he went, I ran into two of our brothers yesterday, in the last week or so. Oh my God, how great is it to speak to some real men? And it's like, it is, because a lot of times we just talk about fluff. What's happening in the footy, what's happening in the cricket at the moment, absolutely nothing, obviously. But when you have these real conversations, it just opens up your mind and your heart, which is just, like I said, in itself is empowering.
And Brett, Joe and I talk all the time about the importance of connection. We're born for connection. And yet in pain, we do isolate ourselves, don't we? We hide away. And yet you're giving evidence here of the power of connection when men get together, men support each other. And actually, from what I'm hearing is through the courses that you run and the courses that you've taken place yourself, you have been given permission, you're giving men permission to connect, to support each other, to be vulnerable. And again, we talk about the power of vulnerability because that's where growth takes place. And I honour the work that you're doing to give men that safe place to be vulnerable.
Yeah. Obviously, Brene Brown is the queen of vulnerability, and I love her work. And that's a massive word for me. I use that a lot. You know, it's being vulnerable is one of the most powerful strengths you can have. And by being vulnerable, you're just being authentic and open and being yourself. And if you cry, it doesn't matter if you cry, if you laugh, if you hug a man, you know, it's all about opening up your heart and being the best version of yourself. And that starts with the vulnerability and being honest with yourself first and then the world.
Yeah, and because Brett, obviously you had this crippling depression. Some people just have depression and they have depression. There is no reason. But you had a reason for yours. And so you obviously went to therapy, but it wasn't really until you addressed the core of the issue. So you were abused age 6 years old, is that right?
That's right, yes, by a neighbour.
It was when you addressed that, and only when we actually start to share our story. Another beautiful Brené Brown thing is we start to share our story, we start to shed the shame that we carry with us, and all of that guilt and horrible feelings we carry with us are something that was never our fault. It was never our shame to carry, but you had the courage to address that issue.
Yeah, and you talk about all those emotions, and the mind's a really funny thing. And having look back at what's happened to me, you know, when I was 20 years old, and because I knew that what had happened to me all my life, but it didn't affect me until I was about 19, 20. And all of a sudden, all these emotions and feelings started to come up, and it really started to eat away at me. And then you look back at 6-year-old Brett when you're 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, and you would think that little Brett had a 20-year-old brain or a 30-year-old brain. And so the mind plays tricks, and it's very smart because when you're 6 years old, it locks that trauma down, so you don't have to deal with it because you're not emotionally mature enough to deal with it. But when you get to that more mature age, all of a sudden it starts to unlock those closed doors, and then the feelings start to pour out. And I didn't tell anyone. No one knew about this till I was about 27, 28 when I spoke to my counsellor. I didn't tell my mum and dad and family till I was 28 years old. So they had no idea that it even happened. And that in itself, by releasing that, was a massive. I was on a high for days afterwards, after unleashing my burden, I suppose, if that's what you want to call it. But it was the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment, but blame was the other one. I blamed myself, and no matter what anyone said to me, it's still the feelings that you carried around. You had those, and you couldn't, because they were so embedded in you, you couldn't get rid of them. So it wasn't till I actually, when I was 50, like I said, I went and did that workshop for 3.5 days. I actually got to deal with it in a different way, not just talking about it. And I actually got to reclaim my life back. And that was the massive catalyst that allowed me to change my perspective about who I was as a person, because I didn't like myself very much. And even if I go back a step, I felt like a boy in a man's body until I was 42. I've been married for 2 years by that stage, and I'd been a police officer, a detective, I was a chiropractor running my own business. And at the age of 42, I still felt like a fraud because I thought someone would find out that I'm still a child in a man's body. And that's the mindset you have. And it wasn't until I was 50, and I attribute that growth from the age of 42, thanks to my wonderful wife. But it was that actually being able to actually reclaim my life back and reclaim what happened to me as a child and taking my power back. That's what changed it for me. And that's what I try and incorporate into my workshops. So they can reclaim that lost youth or that lost love or that trauma, whatever it was that may be holding them back, they can actually deal with it in a different way.
And to reclaim that power, that takes incredible courage. And I know that all the words you've used so far will be triggering many of our listeners, male listeners who have been sexually abused, we interviewed an incredible chap called Ken Clearwater, who was raped as a child and sexually abused. And his stats on male rape and male sexual abuse is much greater than we think it is. So if you're a listener today and you have been involved in sexual abuse as a child or you've been raped, do seek help. At that turning point there is when you can become true to yourself and you can reach in with those emotions which you've talked about: guilt, shame, embarrassment, blame, all those crippling emotions. Unless they come out, they're going to manifest in a sickness or an illness or depression, aren't they?
Exactly right. And it's one of those, for me, it was, I'd had enough. I don't live like this anymore. And that was the turning point. I just got sick and tired of living like that. And having that conversation with that friend of mine, he's seen through me and he's actually just called me out. And having that tough conversation, and what that particular workshop I did, every man on that workshop I was obviously nervous and a little bit wary about what was going to happen. But stepping up and actually dealing with it, it was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. And I still, even now, just reliving it as I talk about it, the fear was just like, oh my God, this is going to be hard. And I burst into tears before I even started. In fact, I was standing, in a circle of 50 men, and I knew that something was going to happen. I started crying because I was already in the mindset to deal with it. And a friend of mine standing next to me he's looking around going, what are you crying for? Nothing else is happening. What's happening? But I was already there. I was already in that headspace and that heart space to deal with it. And even though it was the scariest thing I had ever done, it was the best and most empowering and the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life.
Yes, it took a man to call you out. There was accountability in it, wasn't there? There was another man that recognized it in you. He called you out. And I think that accountability is so important. Men being accountable for other men. Even if you're a man listening to this and you think, well, I don't relate to it, I don't have these problems, I don't carry shame or guilt, I don't need to go and do my work, then call out other men. When you see your friends in a state, you see them go quiet, you're picking up on those signals, call them out and allow other men to be accountable as well.
Absolutely. And that in itself is really empowering. I've got a very, very close mate of mine, and we've known he's had a few issues for a number of years. And one particular night, something happened and I let it sit because it wasn't the right time. But the next morning I dragged him out, went for a walk up the top of the hill and just went, mate, we need to chat. And his life has changed dramatically in the last 12 months. He's been sober for 9 of those. And it just by that one conversation and calling him out, his life has changed. He's probably saved his marriage, having his children there for him. And that, for me, just having that one conversation with that really close friend of mine, that's what it's all about. And no matter what I've done and everything else in my life, that will be one of my big highlights, because I've seen the changes in that man in such a short period of time, and I just love him to death.
And I think it's important for listeners to understand that change is hard, it is difficult, and it is scary, because as humans, we are programmed to stay in the now. We're programmed to stay in what we're comfortable with. And even if comfortable means shame, hurt, guilt, embarrassment, blame, that's where our comfort zone is, if that's where we built in our subconscious. So to change out of that, it takes huge amounts of courage. And and I can see why all your feelings came bubbling to the surface when you were ready to talk about it, because it is fearful, it is scary, but anything that scares you that much is so worth doing, isn't it? And that change, it's difficult, but it can be done. And it's so worth it when you cross the hill and you get over the other side.
Absolutely. And after that weekend away, that 3.5 days, I was on an emotional high for 6 or 8 weeks, but what I've learned since then is that part of my life was so intertwined with every aspect of my life that I've removed this massive big chunk out, and there was just all these holes left in me, and all of a sudden things started to fall apart, and I'd get emotional about things, I'd get really angry and frustrated about things, whereas the last 8 weeks I was on this euphoric high, and I couldn't understand why. And it wasn't until I took a step back and go, well, that's affecting me because of this. That child abuse affected this part of my life, and that part of my life, and this part of my life, and it affected everything within the way I was living and how I lived and how I reacted. And so I had to go through and learn how to live again almost. Kim and I had to redefine our relationship numerous times because of it, because I had changed as a person and I was continually changing as we went along. And by having that support system in place and speaking to some brothers and sisters that I'd formed this amazing relationships with, they helped me work through it. So the first step is one thing, but you have to be consistent afterwards, otherwise you just go back to an old pattern. So for me, even though I dealt with my childhood, I still had to learn how to be me again. And what had happened was, and I explained this to someone not long ago, is once you go through this, the old Brett is dead, but you haven't found the new Brett yet. And there's a transition period that takes a bit of time to get from that old Brett to that new Brett, but you have to work hard at it. And that's that consistency again, about doing something every day and being consistent so you can find who you are and deal with all the other leftover shit that's wrapped up within for me, the child abuse.
Yeah. And that to me screams identity, because you built your identity around one version of Brett, and that's what your identity was. And identity is so important. You know, Sue and I are so passionate about finding your identity, finding your passion, finding your purpose. But you had built an identity around that Brett, you know, abused Brett. And when you can be the no longer the victim, the empowered Brett, of course you're going into a new identity. And yeah, it's painful, and it's, you know, it's like we have these big, huge spiritual awakenings. We don't just have one, do we? We have them over and over again. And once we start on this journey, they never stop.
No, and that's the beauty about it. And you know, you learn something new every day or every week. And what I've learned is that, you know, I have to keep challenging myself. I've got this insatiable lust for learning at the moment. You know, I just want to keep on learning, and I'll go through little periods where I go, I'm just going to have a break for a couple of weeks, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, I need to read this, I need to do that, I need to do this course, and it just keeps compounding on top of each other in a positive way. And that, you know, that's the big difference for me. You know, at the moment I'm challenging myself every morning. I'm getting up with 6 degrees this morning at our place, and I went and jumped in the pool for 10 minutes, just sat in the pool, and it was very cold, but I've been doing it for 2 weeks, and because I love the whole Wim Hof Iceman breath exercises. I'm doing breath work and that sort of thing, and so I can do, and I'm also doing journaling. So I'm doing lots of little things every day, so to make sure that I'm still staying on that positive path. And that's the ice plunges or the pool plunges have been, God, it was cold this morning, but they've been invigorating, and I just feel so much better for it already. It's only been 2 weeks.
And what you're talking about is that there's not really a beginning and an end. We're on a journey. And for listeners that are picking up, what are the tools I need to use? There's lots of different tools. It might be counselling at one stage. It might be mentoring with men. It might be workshops. It might be exercise. There's different parts of the journey. It's the relationship with the wife or the children that you're going to go on. That everybody's part of that journey, to be open to where the messages are going to come from, where the support's going to come from. To be safe in the work that you do is quite critical, though, isn't it? To be in a safe place to do that work. But the beauty of what you're saying is that this is an unraveling journey. It's like a mystery, and it's like a sort of an adventure you're going on to find clues along the way. There's not a set remedy that you can pick and use.
No, and I sort of say that a lot, you know, depending on what you want to achieve, you know, it might be you want to get fit, then you have to find the best way for you to get fit, and that includes overall your diet, your sleep patterns, how much water intake you have, and then what sort of exercises you enjoy, because there's no point going out and running if you don't like running. There's no point. I you know, those step master things that they do, what do they call them, when they have the handles and the steps going up and down? I hate those. They drive me batty. I think they're boring as anything. But I can go I used to be able to go for a 3-hour run. I used to love it. I love being on the rowing machine. I can do that, you know, for an hour, and it doesn't worry me. But you get me on certain exercises, you know, up and down the pool, bores me silly. But some people just love to swim. That's just their passion. So you have to find something that you love to be able to do that. When it comes to, you know, your mental health stuff and your attitude, maybe just gratitude work. Gratitude work is so, so powerful. You know, I write down 3 things every day that I'm grateful for. Just small things, sometimes big things. And when I first started doing the gratitude work a couple of years ago, I didn't see a massive difference in regards to what was happening initially. And then I had an uncle who passed away, and I was asked to be a a pallbearer, which was the first time I've ever done anything like that. And initially this little bit of fear came over me. And then all of a sudden I was like, wow, I get to say goodbye to this man in a way that no one else can. I get to be there and actually send him on his way. How much of an honor is that? And so all of a sudden my mindset changes through the gratitude work. It was like, oh, I get it now. Yeah. So just little things can make a massive difference.
Yeah. And what you're basically saying is everybody's recipe for a healthy mental well-being is going to be different. And I like to call it a recipe because, you know, we all have to have little bits of this and a little bit of that to make us overall healthy. And that's mind, body, spirit. And yes. What works for you, Brett, might not work for me, and it might not work for Sue. But if we all find our little bit, and if we try little things, you're going to find what fills you up, what makes you the best version of you.
Absolutely. And you adapt and change. So, you know, my pull work, my pull dips, pull plunges, what you want to call them, that might change. The breath work might change that I'm doing. The journaling might change. The audio books. I know I've stepped away from the audio books a lot more recently because it's not something I need at the moment because I'm on a different journey. So it will change and adapt along the way. And I think that's the beauty about it, because you can just, like you said earlier, Sue, there's so much information out there. You just have to find what works for you. And part of the workshop that we do is that we do different sort of processes and different sort of tasks, because not everything works for everybody. And we try and find things that work for certain men who are within the course.
And you're in Australia, and if men in Australia want to find your course, can you tell us a little bit about it and where they can find it?
Yeah, the best place is probably at Dr Brett Dellar on my Facebook page. That's where we do a lot of stuff. We do have the Momentum Revolution website coming online very, very soon in the next couple of months, but that's still in a progress along the way. But yeah, probably Dr. Brett Dellar on Facebook is the best way to do it, and the Momentum Revolution on Facebook as well. But most of my stuff is going through Dr. Brett Dellar at the moment.
And we'll put those details up at the end of the podcast. And there's one lovely quote that you've given us. Would you like to leave the listeners with that lovely quote before we say goodbye?
Yeah, one of the things I've always stood by is you have to get out of your comfort zone. And Roy T. Bennett said this. He said, it's only after you've stepped outside your comfort zone that you begin to grow, change, and transform. And that for me is all about, you have to step out of your comfort zone. And my little, I suppose, philosophy on life is, if you can be out of your comfort zone all the time, that becomes normal. And that's when the real growth can change. That's what I love about it. But you have to step out of your comfort zone to allow that growth to happen. Because if you don't, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. There's no growth going to happen.
Dr. Brett Dellar, Dr. Brett Dellar, thank you so much for coming on today. We honour you and the fact that you have turned your pain into your passion and purpose, and how you are out there lifting other men up. It's fabulous. And the more we can do to help raising mental health, the better our world and the vibrations of the world will be. So thank you so much for all the work you do. Thank you for coming on today. Thank you for your time. And thank yous all round.
Joe, Sue, thank you very much for having me. I loved it. Much appreciated.
Thank you also, Brett, for the work that you've done and the journey that you've been on yourself, which now means you can empower and inspire other men to go on that journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Much appreciated.